I've been thinking about Michigan in terms of what it is that they need to achieve and not what they've already done. That might seem a little bit unfair, I should say. But when you have the idea that you don't need to put together a top 5 recruiting class and win a national championship, I understand that you want to believe that your roster is talented enough to do that. But how do you feel about a Michigan team that's been built the way it has, won Big Ten championships, but hasn't been able to win a college football playoff? Do you think it's about the roster, or do you think it's about perhaps being outplayed and outworked?
Yeah, it's really hard to figure it out. I would say I think there's a couple of factors involved, and I'll go through a couple of them here. I would say the first one is eventually not having the 4 and 5-star talent is probably going to catch up with you, because a lot of times that 4 and 5-star talent has superior athletic traits, and that's why they're rated that high. I remember I was talking to Steve Wiltfong, the director of recruiting for 247 Sports once, and he told me that a lot of recruiting rankings are trait based. So we're looking for, are you a plus athlete? Do you have plus speed? Do you have plus size? And they're not necessarily grading these people on how good of football players they are in that moment. It's trying to project what they can be based on the traits that they have. So eventually those traits are going to shine through, and it happens with depth. So if there was a position where Michigan had a rash of injuries, I think that could then be a problem, maybe with the exception of offensive line. But that is one area where they've been very fortunate the last couple of years, is that they have been an extremely healthy team at a lot of key positions for them, even positions where they didn't have a lot of depth. I guess I would say in the big scheme of things, when they get to these big moments, the things that have made the difference for me is, oddly enough, the offensive line. And this is a group that won the Joe Moore Award, an award that I know that you take very seriously. They won it 2 years in a row, and then they went to the biggest stage. And at first, they were taken apart by a generational Georgia defense that I don't really think anybody faulted them for having trouble with, given the number of draft picks and talent that was on that roster. But then when TCU did it similarly, not in terms of sacking the quarterback, but in terms of 12 and a half or 13 tackles for loss in one game, you start to wonder, oh, okay, when they go outside the Big Ten, is there a speed problem? Is there a strength problem? Is there a scheme problem? So my thing is, they have to get over that hump by proving they can do it against a really good team from outside the smash mouth Big Ten conference. And over time, I think eventually they're going to have to find guys at the skill positions. And when I say skill position, I mean receiver, that can compete on the edges with some of these 4 and 5-star corners, because you've got to win in the air eventually. And they haven't been able to do that yet.
Win in the air when people expect you to throw it too, because one of the things that I've also been really interested in seeing, and JJ McCarthy's been great on play action, but it's really difficult to say that that's a great quarterback if that scheme is just not working the way it does because of Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I think you're on to something when you talk about how we look at this team from a depth standpoint, because nobody wants to talk about teams as if they're going to sustain injury, even though that's exactly what happens, and how deep you can go matters in as far as how far you can go. I guess the other counterpoint to this would be, is Michigan the best in the country at overdeveloping talent?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to give away exactly one of the stories that I'm working on, but when you were talking about the preseason, big features that I've been working and spending a lot of time on, my Michigan angle is related to how they go about developing this talent, because I think that is the most fascinating part. They have a culture right now and a scientific approach right now and a staff right now that is doing every single thing they possibly can to maximize player development. And I think they're getting more support from the dietitians of the world, from the sports performance aspects of the world. They have everything they could possibly want from a staff perspective, from a resource perspective, and they're using it about as well as anybody in the country. And I just think the way that they're training, and again, I'm being a little bit vague on purpose because I have a story coming out in a couple weeks that explores this in more detail. But essentially, they have found ways to train this as much as they train this. And that, I think, is the biggest factor for them right now. They are finding ways
for our
to
podcast listeners, you're pointing to your head and you were pointing to your muscle.
Sorry, forgot.
That's okay.
Forgot there's an
That's
audio
all right.
component.
No, it's all right.
They have found a way to train their brain as much as they have found a way to train the muscles. And what that has done is allow them to believe that they're stronger, believe that they're better, believe that they're faster than guys who are probably actually bigger and stronger and faster than them, but they just want it more and they're tougher. And if they get smacked in the mouth, they don't care, because their mind is so elitely, it's sharpened to such an elite level that they are just It's impressive the way this machine is humming right now. And so that, I think, is the biggest thing. They're combining, players that want to work hard and want to get better with elite mental toughness that, quite frankly, has trumped their biggest rival the last 2 years.
I think it's an interesting place to build your program from, because you'll know I am a self-made man, right? I believe in hustle. I believe in outworking people. I believe that skill will make up for what talent doesn't do. But it is one thing to be in that mindset. It is another thing to know that you're supposed to win national championships. And that's what I think I'm looking for from Michigan. And frankly, what I'm looking for from Penn State. Now, you have a feature out that we can talk about on Penn State and going into this year 10 with James Franklin. I want to start with this. I think I agree with you in that, is this the most talented Penn State team that James Franklin has ever had?
I say yes. And when I was out in State College a little while ago, I flat out asked some of the players, like, is this the most talented team? And Keandre Lambert-Smith, their number one wide receiver, said, not only is this the most talented team in recent memory, he said it might be one of the most talented Penn State teams ever. And so, again, this isn't a guy who was necessarily alive and old enough to understand how good some of those Joe Pa teams were back in the day, but that's a pretty big statement. And if you believe it, then that's all that matters. So, for me, this is a team that has a ton of talent right now. But RJ, I got to think you agree with me that so much of it hinges on Drew Aller. And how much can you reasonably expect from a sophomore quarterback? You put a lot of time into studying these quarterbacks. Are you buying that he can come in and contribute as a true sophomore? And then let me just add this quick caveat, which is, can Penn State use the Cade McNamara plan, which is essentially, let's hand the ball to Nick Singleton and Katron Allen the way we handed it to Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and ask Cade McNamara to do the minimum amount, but he will do it very well because he's efficient? And is that a plan that Penn State should use with Drew Aller this season?
I'll pick it up and take it a step farther. I think you use the plan you used for J.J. McCarthy last year. He's got that sort of talent. He can move and he can sling it. Everybody's seen the arm talent. Everybody's seen him throw rockets. It's, do you trust him to make those play action throws? And if Nick Singleton and Katron Allen are doing this year what they did last year, you also have guys on the end of those passes to go along with Keandre Lambert, Dante Cephas, and really talented tight ends that could take advantage of that, to say nothing of what you could do on just dump routes to guys like Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who are really outstanding prospects. And the defense is going to give him a lot of help. Like, let's not be shy about that. He's going to get the ball back and he's going to get it in plus situations because Manny Diaz has been so good at that. I think it's less for me about, can Drew Aller do that, and more, do you think Mike Yurcich is going to let him? Like, so we're talking about it, right? What's your sense from the offensive coordinator? How does he feel about his starting quarterback?
I mean, they love everything he can do, and they've been in on him from the very beginning. One of the stats in the story is that when they offered him a scholarship, he was ranked outside the top 400 prospects. He was a 3-star guy when they offered him, and then he became a 4-star guy and became a 5-star guy and had a great Elite 11 finals and all this stuff to blow up. But they've been in on Drew Aller from the beginning, and so they really think that he has the opportunity to be special. Will they let him? I'm not really sure. And that's the tricky part, right? It's the same question we asked about Michigan last year. When are they going to let J.J. McCarthy throw the ball? But I'm curious about how they're going to approach in-game management, because the two stats in the research for this story that really blew my mind is that James Franklin has only won one of his last 10 or 11 games, I can't quite remember, against top 10 teams. So he's basically, 1-9, 1-10, whatever it is, over the last 6 years. And during that span, they've lost 12 one-score games. So how are you getting over the hump in these games that you're losing by a field goal or a touchdown or 1 point? What are you trying to do? How do you find that last little 1%? And that was kind of the onus of the story, is what are they trying to do to get over that hump? And they're basically adapting the Michigan plan from after they lost to Georgia, which is, we just have to outwork everybody. We have to out-hustle everybody. We have to change our habits. We have to be very disciplined. And if all those things come together, then when it matters, it will help us. But a lot of the in-game management, as you know too, is coaching decisions. It's the key play calls in the big moments. It's going for it on 4th down or punting. It's kicking a field goal versus trying to punch it into the end zone when you're at the 1-yard line, whatever the case may be. And so that's what I'm really curious about, is, can the staff make any adjustments to their in-game management, or do they feel they need to turn those very narrow losses into wins, and then potentially try and push Michigan or Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship picture in that loaded East Division.
Hey, it comes down to don't get taken apart by JT Tuimoloau out. Like that's it. They were winning that game against Ohio State, and then that dude just decided to wreck it. It's that simple for me. It's finishing games, which I think is really a conversation we have about many teams that are competing for their first college football playoff appearance. USC comes to mind for me. Can you finish games? I think they give up something like 17 points per game in the fourth quarter of their last 4 games out. It's really endemic across the sport, and it really separates the goods from the championship contenders. Let's go around the Big Ten for a second, because I also know that you got to go up to Iowa City, spend some time with the Iowa Hawkeyes since Cade McNamara's arrival. Didn't get to talk to him, haven't got to talk to him since he got to Iowa. What's your sense of Cade and what he expects at Iowa?
I was blown away by talking to Cade because, again, for people who don't know, I live in the Michigan area. And so I was around Ann Arbor a lot when Cade was the starter. That was before I worked for Fox. I was covering Michigan specifically. So I saw every press conference he ever gave, every interview he ever gave. And as time went on, he just got more and more sullen and down and guarded because he knew there was going to be tons of questions about J.J. McCarthy, and he didn't want to answer them, and he felt pressured by that situation. When I saw him in Iowa City, which was about maybe a month ago now, he was, smiling from ear to ear, laughing, just having an unbelievable time. He told me it's the happiest he's ever been in his life, which for a guy that became the first Michigan quarterback to win a Big Ten championship in 17 years, that says something. He feels that this is the ideal spot for him. He's excited. He feels wanted. They told him straight up, you're the starter. There is no competition. This is your team. And when you say that to a guy that's coming off a big injury like Cade is, having knee surgery, that's empowering. It means something. And he loves everything that Kirk Ferentz does and has built there and the way he handles the program. So Cade is expecting this to be a very, very positive season for him and for Iowa. And I'll sum it up by saying I asked him, Cade, you know what your schedule looks like and you know what Michigan's schedule looks like. The only way you play each other is if it's the Big Ten championship or the college football playoff. I said, what do you think about that? And he said, let's just say I hope it happens.
He is a fiery man, if nothing else, right? And I remember talking with Jim Harbaugh last year, and he called Cade McNamara a young Jimmy Harbaugh. And then I come to find out that's really how Jim Harbaugh sees a lot of the players that are gritty, are tough, are nasty, who don't necessarily walk into this thing expecting to say nice things about their opponents. They expect to go beat up on their opponents. I really enjoy that. I thought it was interesting what you point out about how Kirk Ferentz has built the program and what he expects from Iowa, simply because this is a program that ain't won a Big Ten championship since 2004. And it's a program that's been on the edge of doing just that and fallen short because of the offense. Like, I want to be very clear about this. Phil Parker's defense has been the second best in the country for 2 consecutive years. Does Cade McNamara have what he needs around him to not just make that offense something like competent, but I would say the counterpoint would be, or the comparison I would make is Georgia in 2021. Can you stay out of the defense's way?
Yeah, I think they can, because Cade is a guy who is at all costs going to protect the football. He is the type of quarterback who, if you present him with a narrow window where he can throw it and try and thread it and maybe it goes for a touchdown, or he can be safe and cautious and check it down or throw it out of bounds, he's checking it down or throwing it out of bounds every time. All he cares about is taking care of the football and giving his team the best chance to win. So he's not going to make mistakes. And I don't know if they have enough weapons for this passing offense to become dynamic, but when you add Eric All, his former Michigan teammate, and you pair him with Luke Lachey, a tight end who is the next great Iowa tight end, that gives him 2 options there. He's got a couple of returning receivers that they like, Nico Reganey being the veteran of the bunch there, going into, I think, his 6th year or 7th year now. And then, of course, they have Caleb Brown, the transfer from Ohio State, who is, the biggest skill player that they've ever brought in at that position. And so I'm curious to see what it looks like. But at the end of the day, you and I both know this is a team that is going to win games in all 3 phases. It's going to be offense, defense, and special teams. And let's not forget, they have one of the best punters in the country, too. And that's going to be a big part of their narrative this season. So I think they have a chance to come out of that West and make it to the Big Ten title game, and it would be fascinating if they got a chance to play Michigan. So I think there will be enough improvement on offense for them to win somewhere between 8 and 10 games this season.
Corey Taylor for Heisman. I dare Iowa to send me the shirt. Say I won't. Say I won't wear it. Couple more for you here before we let you go, Mike. Ryan Day has won a college football playoff semifinal. He's at Ohio State. Jim Harbaugh has not. He's at Michigan. Lincoln Riley has not. He's at SC. Brian Kelly has not. He's at LSU, but he was at Notre Dame. This would still be the case if Ohio State was 3-0 against Michigan instead of 1-2. What do you think about folks being tepid about Ohio State's national championship hopes and thinking about putting Ryan Day on a hot seat? I mean, it's preposterous to me, but we're in August and people still talk about it.
I do not buy that he is on any kind of a hot seat right now. The only thing that I will say is if they were to lose to Michigan again this season and miss the college football playoff, then I think there will start to be legitimate questions asked about whether or not he is actually improving the trajectory of the program. It's one thing to keep it the same. It's one thing to continue recruiting at a high level. But if you're not coming closer to tipping it over the edge and winning a national title or getting to that national title game, people will ask questions. Now, the flip side of that, of course, as you well know, RJ, is if that field goal goes in against Georgia, in all likelihood, no disrespect to TCU, they probably bashed TCU's head in the national championship game, maybe not quite to the degree that Georgia did, but in a somewhat similar fashion. And we're now talking about Ryan Day having lost 2 games in a row to Jim Harbaugh, but having a national championship. And we would not be discussing this whatsoever. So that is the nature of the sport. That is that's how fickle the beast can be. I don't think he's on the hot seat whatsoever, but I do think if he were to lose 3 in a row to Michigan, and if he were to then also fall out of the college football playoff, it becomes a little more of a problem. The caveat to that, or the asterisk that you put on that, is when we expand to 12 teams, it's not going to matter because Ohio State is almost certainly going to be in the playoff every single year, or just about every single year. And then you can lose as many games in a row as you want to Michigan and still be in the playoff and have a chance to metaphorically cut down the nets, so to speak, to use the basketball analogy.
Man, you can take the guy out of UConn, take the UConn out of the guy on that one.
True.
We got a basketball reference here on this college football podcast. I'm teasing. I want to just finish with that by saying Ryan Day has produced a first-round quarterback. Each quarterback that started a game for him has been drafted in the first round. Kyle McCord started a game last year, quiet as it's kept, and they're in the middle of a quarterback derby, but I expect him to get that right. Thank you for watching the #1 college football show. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you don't miss any of the best college football coverage in America.